Commission meeting for this Thursday, July 15th. We'd like to do a roll call. So commissioners, if you could please say your name. I'm assuming we're streaming as well on Facebook, so just to make sure everybody on Facebook knows we're here.
Bob Clark.
Larry Watts.
Joanne Mackey.
Lynn Carter.
Okay, and I am Kristen Crawford. So, as you all can see, you have the minutes attached. If you all have any comments or changes, please advise. Otherwise, oh, come on, Commissioner Key, they move us around. Commissioner Key has joined us. All right, so we're approving the minutes, reviewing the minutes for approval. All right, any corrections, changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion for the approval, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of the approval of the minutes from June 17th? Aye.
Aye.
All right. And so would like to, at this point in time, recognize Mr. Tommy Paradise, who has been in this job a full 9 days as of today. So welcome. Thank you so much for all that you and Ms. Moody did to make sure that we were ready for this meeting today, having just started, and just want you to know that we are here. We look forward to working with you, and congratulations on getting through your first meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate y'all's help, y'all's support, and the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. All right, any changes to the agenda for tonight? Or any?
No, ma'am.
All right, so we will move on to application SP 21-004, Public Safety Headquarters Sketch Plan Review. So this is a sketch plan review, during which time the Planning Commission, any questions or suggestions that you all have, we look forward to you sharing them, as well as hearing from the community on any suggestions or concerns that they may have. We ask that everyone that if you come to speak to the mic, we will first have the applicant, Mr. John C. Thomas, come forward. And for all those who will come forward to the mic, please give your name and your address. And we ask that comments be kept to about 5 minutes so that we can make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am John C. Thomas, and I made the application, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Clifford, our city administrator.
I'm not as tall as the esteemed chief of public safety, so I'll put my mic down here, right here for the 5'7" crowd. So Dr. Crawford and the Planning Commission members, good evening. I'm Jim Clifford. I'm the city administrator here in North Augusta, and I thank you for the opportunity to present tonight on behalf of the city. This is my first presentation to this body since assuming my present duties. So what I'd like to do tonight is present a sketch plan review to the commission for your feedback as part of my feedback directly back to the city council. This was my direction from the city council, was to present to you this evening to get your feedback. So first what I'm going to do is present to you the presentation I gave to the city council, and the intent of that is to illuminate the why. I understand many of the commission members have been in the chair for a while and have dealt previously with the public safety headquarters applications, and so you may be wondering why we're back here again to talk about a very similar issue. And after we've done that, you'll have the actual sketch plan review, which is in front of you, which is really illuminating the what of what the city is trying to accomplish. And with your permission, I'll go ahead and begin the presentation.
If you could just enter your address into the record.
I'll address here for 100 Georgia Avenue in North Augusta, South Carolina 29841. All right. So this is the facts that were presented to me or that I helped derive in my time here in this current job. And so as you go through the list here, for Capital Project Sales Tax 4, this was the number one project in that Capital Project Sales Tax. It's still listed as the number one priority. And if you're familiar with the current state of the facilities, we're in desperate need for a new public safety headquarters. And so in order to kickstart the public safety headquarters, the city took out a $10.5 million bond to jumpstart the project. And then as Capital Project Sales Tax money rolls in every quarter, use that to backstop the additional requirements. The city had previously purchased what is colloquially known as the Flythe and Seven Gables property on Georgia Avenue. Those are three separate and distinct parcels. And the original intent of that was to purchase this for the purpose of the public safety headquarters, the courts, and fire station number 1. At a previous time, the city made a decision to separate those projects, and fire station number 1 was cleaved from the original intent and is now under construction on Martintown Road.
Excuse me 1 second. We're having the screens are going out. They're blinking and they're going out and it's kind of staying out for a moment.
I'll pause while see if they can figure out their technical issue,
'Cause we can't.
just so you don't have to crane your necks to see everything.
Yeah.
So without even having to look at the slides, I'll just tell you the story that I've got, which is, for now, as I assume the duties in August of 2020, I'm presented with a decision that the City Council's made to place the public safety headquarters on city-owned property at East Buena Vista Avenue, which is just east of the current public safety headquarters and courts building. So that's what I'm presented with. We start going through the due diligence process to see what that looks like, and we run into a number of things through our due diligence that would indicate that the cost of that project is going to be significantly higher to put that building on that piece of real estate, to the tune of about $850,000. And so that became a concern for me. And so ultimately what I wanted to do was come back to the council and get their guidance with some different options. And so what I really have to do is say we can either place the public safety headquarters on the city-owned property at East Buena Vista, or we can reconsider the city-owned property on Georgia Avenue and see what that looks like from a cost perspective. And so the other thing to consider is those of you involved in the Planning Commission, I know a lot of folks come to talk to you about a number of different items. The overall cost of construction is spiraling pretty significantly here in the region. So as time goes on, when this project was first envisioned for the $10.5 million, it has grown significantly beyond that just based on construction costs alone. And so as I looked at all those things, my assumption is that the City Council and our citizens would be open to a lower cost construction alternative. And so I brought this back to the City Council for consideration, and I presented two options. And again, that's what I'm going to show you tonight, is kind of what I viewed as the costs associated with those two projects, or the same project at two different locations. How are we doing on our, are you able to visit or see these on the screen now?
We are right now, but we'll adjust and look at the screen if need be.
Okay. So this is what the rendering is for the East Buena Vista site. It's a little more sleek. It kind of meets the building requirements, if you will, for that part of the neighborhood as far as the silver-looking building. And so that's what it looks like situated on East Buena Vista. And here's a second shot of what that would look like, just a different angle, same building, and you've got entrances that would be on Buena Vista and the side street as well. So as we went through our due diligence, here's some of the stuff that cropped up over time. So first you can see, I'm sorry to make you turn around, I feel this is terrible. I take a look at the three distinct properties, if you will, that make up this site, and you can see right in the middle there's a thin rectangle, and that's an easement that goes into the property immediately east of there. So because of that easement, the siting of the building is pretty constricted. It can only go on the north side there. There's no room to put it on the south side of that building and maintain what needs to be done. So there's a lot of restrictions based on the easement. There's also a problem based on the east side of that property. What would be the back side of that building is the slope of the ground that is behind it. And so ultimately that would require a pretty significant retaining wall, and I believe at least one portion is required to be about 11 feet tall. So when you start looking at the costs of a retaining wall and the soil stabilization that goes along with that, and when I say soil stabilization, I'm really not talking about the flat part of the ground there. I'm talking about what has to be done in order to build this retaining wall. So those two things kind of go together. And also, as we look at this site, there's no expansion capability, and there's no parking expansion ability at that site as well. So those are some of the challenges that we started to visit back in the late fall and early spring, and because of that, I wanted to look at some other options. So this brought us back to Georgia Avenue. So as we look at the Georgia Avenue site, again known as the Flythe and Seven Gables property, also three separate and distinct properties. The southernmost property is currently zoned GC. I believe the others are R14. And so as you look at that site there, it's currently city-owned property. And because this site was bought with capital project sales tax money, that really limits us on our abilities to do things there, because either you can build on that site for the purpose of which it was intended, or you have to sell the property to another interest. So you can't just hold it as a general fund obligation could, because it's done by capital project sales tax, which is something that's done via voter referendum, and so you're a much more stringent limitation on those funds. So this is just a different skin of the same building, which is really just a different exterior, which makes it a little more compliant with the neighborhood that it would potentially go in. So just so you have a sense of what the building would look like. And again, that's a second rendering. What you have there is separate entrances on the right side there for the courts, on the left side for public safety. Same building design as under East Buena Vista. So this is our current preferred site plan for Georgia Avenue. And what you'll see there are a few things that I think are important to note. One, you have access to the side streets, not directly onto Georgia Avenue from this site. The second thing to note is you have an expansion capability in the middle of that site. So you could envision potentially a breezeway and another outbuilding, if you will, if it was required 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now as you go forward. And then probably most significantly for some of our nonprofits is the retention of the two legacy buildings along Observatory Avenue. And so you can see those there on the right-hand side of the screen, fronting Observatory. And so our site plan allows for the retention of those two buildings going forward. This also provides additional parking that would not be resident at Buena Vista and provides expansion capability at that site. So this is kind of a money slide. And so these are some of the costs associated with the different sites. Again, these are initial estimates. But I'll go ahead to the next slide. So again, you can see on the left-hand side there on Buena Vista differences in costs for the retaining wall and soil stabilization that are not required at Georgia Avenue. So what you see there for the negative $660,000 is what the county assessed tax value of the property is at Flythe and Seven Gables properties on Georgia Avenue. So that's the minimum. If we put those properties out for bid, that would be the minimum amount that the city would put forth in a procurement process. Now, I would tell you, I've had a number of developers reach out to the city to look to purchase that land, and some of those requests have been in excess of $660,000. We're not able to act on those requests because it didn't go through the normal city procurement process. We would have to go through a formal bid, put this out in a public manner, sealed bid, and let people bid on it that way to get the highest cost and not just take random folks looking to buy that property. So the difference there in cost is about overall $850,000, and that does not include the potential sale of the East Buena Vista property, and that tax value is $223,000. So ultimately, we could be looking at roughly $1 million cost differential between the project at those two different locations. So, as a staff recommendation to the city council, my recommendation was to put forth the concept of putting this on Georgia Avenue for the following reasons. One, its central location in the city. Chief Thomas can certainly talk to this, but ultimately it was the preferred location of public safety. It's got a lower overall cost to the city. It gives us expansion capability. And what was not able to be done in the last iteration was to maintain the legacy structures on Observatory Avenue. And the reason for that is because the original concept going before the Planning Commission was for the courts, the public safety headquarters, and Fire Station 1 all put together. And when you have all three components, you really need every square inch of that property to make that go. And so when the fire department and Fire Station 1 comes off the list, and you have a much more consolidated footprint, you have a little more wiggle room there, which allows us to maintain those buildings in the long term. So some of the downsides of going to Georgia Avenue, one is it delays the overall project a couple of months because this makes us go back through the entire process of coming back to the City Council and the Planning Commission. It's unknown if the community is supportive of this new concept, and then whatever revenue you would get from that location, you're going to lose that on that tax base. And we've had a large variety of different folks ask about that, and the tax base for each of those is quite different. So, for example, we had a senior living assisted facility look at wanting to put something on that site. We've had townhome developers want to look at potentially putting something on that site. And we also had somebody reach out to us about putting an AKC, American Kennel Club, dog pound or something along those lines at that site as well. So, I mean, we've had a wide variety, and these is unsolicited. These are folks that just come to the city and say, hey, I understand you're sitting on this property and we'd like to do something with it if you'll sell it to us. So the next steps we have, and this is one of them, is providing the sketch plan review here to the City Council and also to you as the Planning Commission. We've had an engagement strategy with the Punch and Judy players because they've had some interest in these properties. We also met with Dr. Newell from Historic North Augusta, and then also we have not yet met with the neighbors, but I see a number of them here in the audience here today, so I'm sure they're going to have some feedback for you all as we go forward on this, and I'd like to be able to have an opportunity to talk to them as well to socialize kind of these concepts. And then I have to come up with a legal plan to be able to deal with the legacy buildings on Observatory Avenue so that we can figure out whether those buildings can legally be moved over to a nonprofit for maintenance or whether that becomes city property with a nonprofit actually putting money into those facilities to fix them up. And the risk right there for us is really to be able to move forward, which we have not done yet, on design work for Georgia Avenue. So until the City Council and the Planning Commission start to move forward on our actions, which will come to you in a more formal setting later, which is trying to zone this as P for public use, we're going to have to sit on our design work, because what I don't want to do is put money forth in the design and have this get changed, or have the Planning Commission not want to go forward on this concept and recommend to the City Council and not have the City Council blessing to move forward. So ultimately, we're going to continue to maintain a little bit of risk to be able to move forward on this. We're going to let them do the work that they can do, regardless of the site. There's some work that can be done on those buildings, regardless of whether they, from a design perspective, whether they go to Georgia Avenue or whether they go to East Buena Vista. But aside from that, we're going to have to take a pause until we have a way ahead and a decision that the City Council can move forward with. So with that, it's really your choice, Dr. Crawford and Planning Commission, whether you'd like to talk a little bit about the sketch plan review, whether you'd like to talk about the presentation. I'm open to either.
So do any of the commissioners have any questions on the presentation?
I had one. What's the $900,000 problem with the land? There was when you started out, I asked Larry.
Soil stabilization.
Soil stabilization. It's $1 million.
So that the soil stabilization and the retaining wall are items that are clumped together. Those two things go hand in hand. So there's the cost of the wall itself, but then you have to excavate a decent amount of soil on the backside of that. And because of the way this property is, you can't impede on the other person's property to do the soil stabilization. You got to pull the soil out. You got to put the wall in, backfill the soil. There's a fair amount of detail work that has to happen to make that all go. I can certainly defer to our construction team here with Mark Costner and Darren Pritchard from JLA if you'd like to have more of a granularity on that topic.
I'm just wondering if there was some issue with the
Correct. And because of the way that the soil is, you don't want to have a collapse situation if you get heavy rains or anything else where it could cause washout, where part of the hillside could potentially slide down into the back of the building.
Can you place that slide back up again? We're not.
Yes, sir. Would you like the money slide?
No.
First one or second one?
So I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, if we spent all the money on Buena Vista, what I caught you saying, or thought I heard you saying is, that property is pretty much built out.
That's correct, ma'am.
So we wouldn't have, something changed and we're all gone and they wouldn't have any way to add anything?
That's my understanding, Councilwoman. As I look at that site and we look at citing how that would go, especially with the current easement that's there, there's really a limited amount of options we have to be able to expand on that site. It's a compromised site as far as the design, as far as the shape of the site, and some of the restrictions associated with that. And so ultimately, the way I put it to the city council was, we're only going to build a public safety headquarters probably once every 40 or 50 years. So we have to make a good foundational decision when we can, given the constraints that we have based on the land that we own, to be able to make a good call so that we can anticipate future requirements. And so the design that we have today is to meet the requirements that we have for today, along with some growth associated with that. But if we end up having additional requirements, there's really a limited ability to absorb that in that facility or on that footprint. So I'm a fan of flexibility personally, as a planner, and so to be able to have the ability to have some flexibility on that site, to me, was a powerful thing.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Explain to us why the city would not be able to maintain that Georgia Avenue site for some other city purpose.
Well, currently I have no other city purpose to put it there. The main reason is because we used capital project sales tax money to procure that site. So when you use capital project sales tax money to purchase an item, it has to be for the item that was done in conjunction with the voters' requirements. And so ultimately, I can't take money out of a capital project sales tax bin and do a general fund obligation with that money. What you'll see across capital project sales taxes, and we're currently in 4, we still have unexecuted money in CPSD 3, but sometimes you'll see the same project transit across multiple capital project sales tax. In that case, you have the ability to use money out of either of those capital project sales taxes to fund that project. But what I may not do, to my understanding, is use general fund obligation dollars to backstop something that was done through capital project sales tax. And likewise, I can't pull money out of capital project sales tax and use it to fund something else. So we use capital project sales tax money to procure that property. And so because of that, I have the option of either executing a plan that involved capital project sales tax, and the only facilities in capital project sales tax are a fire station and a public safety headquarters, or I can sell that property, and the money that is derived from the sale of that property would go back into the bin, if you will, or the bucket of that capital project sales tax.
So when that money was borrowed or used out of that capital sales tax, it was specifically for a public safety fire station building.
It could be used for anything within the categories of capital project sales tax, but in that particular instance, sir, you're correct. It was borrowed or removed from the capital project sales tax for the purpose of building a public safety headquarters and fire station combination at that time.
And that's the only thing it can be used for.
It can also be used for anything in capital let's say we sold the property, I could use that to fund other things within capital project sales tax 4, but a lot of those projects are wastewater treatment projects, road resurfacing, so not facilities themselves. So I mean, I can certainly use that money in those kinds of ways, but to your root question is, can I put a different activity, city activity, at that site? I believe the answer is no.
That's my question.
What other areas did you seek to put the public safety? We see 2. So we got other lands in North Augusta. Why that area?
Well, I would tell you that when they originally looked at the public safety headquarters, sir, there was a number of options that they looked at. I think they looked at a number of properties that were already built to convert, and then also looked at other city assets. And so at that time, they converted on the public safety headquarters going to Georgia Avenue. But as I look today at the inventory of property that the city has, I don't see a lot of options. One option that if you want to look at a large land mass, the city's in ownership of what we call the Country Club property north of I-20. That property comes with a conservation easement and limits greatly the activities we can do on that property. Also, it's not centrally located to the city as well. So when I look at the other properties that we have, you've got some slices of property that abut the Greenway. Those properties are not listed in a way, rectangular shape that gives us a lot of flexibility. And so as I do the survey of the property in the city, I don't see any other options other than these two city-owned properties that we have. We could always look at other options as far as other properties, but I would tell you, when I look at doing a land purchase, I'm a little concerned about that. And quite frankly, a lot of land right now is going for a decent amount of money because developers are starting to pull it in for residential growth purposes.
What about the tennis courts right across from the public safety? What's the acreage right there?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, Commissioner.
Did you even look at that?
Not in the case of this particular instance, no.
What about the neighborhood preservation corridor that we had this big brouhaha about the neighborhood when we had a public hearing in changing that? Have you taken that into consideration that we got to go back through that?
Commissioner Key, we would have to go back through the Planning Commission, through you all as a body, to request public zoning for those three pieces of property, and then come back to the City Council with your recommendation, whether it be for or against.
And so the difference between then and now is that we've separated the fire station.
That's correct, sir.
I have a follow-up question to Ms. Mackey's. Could you pull up the Blythe property drawing that you had of the proposed property? And just
Is this the proper slide, sir?
yes,
okay.
sir. You talked. I think what I heard you say was potential expansion on this site. As I understand, it would be in this green area right there. Is that what I understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And my concern about this property as it is, traveling Georgia Avenue that way, putting a building there further makes pulling cars out of this at Butler up there makes that kind of a blind corner. And again, I understand that expansion is years down the future or whatever, but just thinking ahead, how feasible and what have you guys looked at what a building on that property would do to visibility around that bend there for traffic coming up on cars coming out of again, is it Butler? Do I have that right?
You do, sir.
Butler Avenue.
And that's a fair concern. So a potential workaround would be to make that parking and to do extension of the building further along, closer towards one of the buildings. So on the top end of that property.
Yeah, so you've got the flexibility to put it somewhere else on the property, depending on when and where you got to that point in the expansion process.
Yes, sir.
It was my understanding, I feel like we've looked at this about 50 times, but maybe not that many, but it was my understanding that we couldn't use, because I like the tennis court being used and the community center that's not used very much to be used, and I was told that didn't work because you couldn't get the fire truck up the hill. Was that not the big thing we had at one point about the fire truck going up the hill?
That is correct.
That's all we were ever told. You can't get the fire truck up the hill. So why would we even consider Buena Vista? Because that's at the bottom of the hill.
Well, the fire station's from there.
But I'm just saying everything's been moved around. Why would we go back to that? And why could we not go back to the community center and the tennis courts?
Ma'am, I can't speak to that. I could just tell you before I took this role, that the City Council had given guidance to the staff to put the plan to put the public safety headquarters on the East Buena Vista property, mostly because that property was in city possession. It was a city-owned property, and the total number of acres supported the basic concept. And so that's what the staff started the plan on.
So is there not, I mean, I know we keep talking about that wall, and I understand your wall and all of that, but if we had the wall, what's behind the wall? That property can't be sold to us? Nobody will sell us anything else on Buena Vista to make that work better?
So we've had some dialogue with the property owner. My understanding is they're not interested in selling at this time. I haven't had direct conversations with him. I know he's had some conversations with other staff members. We had approached him about the easement access to be able to waive his easement requirements, which I don't believe he was willing to do at the time. And so the question also is, do we have the ability to even purchase that property, because that further drives the overall cost. So even if I save, let's call it $1 million on the retaining wall and the soil stabilization, I'm still going to eat a big chunk of that going into a property purchase next door.
Okay. I just wondered if there wasn't a way to make it bigger. Because I understand that it's not probably a very smart idea to build the smallest thing you can build.
Any other questions of the presentation? All right, if we could go into the plan sketch review, please, and then when he finishes, we'll go into public comments.
So you have the planning sketch review before you. Some of the material is redundant based on the presentation I've given you earlier, but some of it's not. So this talks a little bit about the existing site condition through your application, and as you're aware, you've got the two buildings fronting observatory that have been retained. You also have a motel, if you will, low-slung brick building in the middle of the property. That's there, and that bisects the property itself, where the south end of the property is currently zoned as general commercial, and the north end of the property is zoned R14, both parcels that the residences currently sit on their front observatory. And as shown in the diagram, that site has access to Georgia Avenue, Observatory Avenue, and Butler Avenue on all three sides, although our current plans only involve Observatory and Butler for access. We've done a number of utility studies with JLA and with our own utilities department, and we believe that that site is supportable based on the water mains and the sewer that's at that location. It's not located in a floodplain, and it is located in the waterworks basin through our stormwater management district drainage basin plan. So on our third page here, paragraph 3.6.4.3 under permitted uses, we pulled out what we believe is the relevant topic, which is the P for public use district, which includes fire, sheriff, emergency services, government offices or other government civic uses, and so on. So to your point earlier about the overlay, when something is zone P for public use, it is waived or exempted from the overlay requirements. And there are a number of attachments on there, including the elevation, a copy of the site plan or proposed site plan, a copy of the properties themselves, the topography, and their current zoning. So what I hope to receive from the Planning Commission tonight is your feedback, and I believe I've heard some of it, which is you've asked me about the possibility or potentials of other alternate locations and why those cannot be considered or should be considered, specifically the tennis courts and the community center area. Are there any other feedback items that the Commission would like me to consider or the staff to consider?
Any other questions? All right. So if we could hear, did you have anything else before we open up for public?
No, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity to present today to the Commission as a first time, and it was entertaining and good for me. Hope good for you, and I'm excited to see where this goes. I think ultimately we're trying to present what we think is going to be the best option for all of our citizens based on a fiscal argument and the ability to maintain some of the historic properties that are in that district. So I thank you very much for your time and for your consideration of this matter.
So now we'd ask that members of the community who'd like to come up, please come up, share your comments, or ask your questions. What we would like to do is for Chief Thomas and Mr. Clifford, if need be, to respond all at the end. So we'll do all of the responses at the end so that we don't have to keep kind of going back and forth. All right. So if there are any members from the community that would like to share your concerns or ask any questions, please step forward. And again, please give your name and address. Good evening.
My name is Dave Leverett. I'm at 121 Butler Avenue. An immediate question comes to mind because it's right in line with everything that you guys have been asking. Is the property that the city owns down at Buena Vista is 50 acres on between Buena Vista and the river. You're talking about developing 4 on one side of the road, and my question is, what's wrong with the other 46 acres? I'm sure there's a good answer to that, and I'd like to hear it. I think there's probably a good answer for that, and we're talking about the site being completely filled and developed. The site where the current courts and the fire station are on a big tract of land. It goes far back, and I know it's not the most usable land, but I'd like to know why we're not considering what's 50 acres and why we have to pick the 4 acres that's all screened off. I agree with you. We need to be able to expand. We need to put ourselves in a place where we can get bigger and take on more business, and I'd just like an answer to that question. The other point I'd like to make, I came down here with 2 books tonight. This one, published in 1980, is The History of North Augusta. About the time this book was published, an application was put into the National Historic Register to claim the Butler Avenue area, George Avenue area, as a National Historic District. This one was published in 2000. I think it's remarkable that a town of North Augusta, the size of North Augusta, would have 2 volumes written about its history. It indicates that there's been an immense value in the history of this town from all generations. It's been 6 or 7 generations. We're a very young town, 120 years old or so, but there's been a significant interest in the history. And the very first sentence on the very first page, 2000, in 1984, the George Avenue, Butler Avenue area of North Augusta was approved for nomination to the National Register of Historic Places by the South Carolina State Board of Review of the South Carolina Department of Archives and History in Columbia. Very first page, first sentence, the 2000 edition. I don't know, like I said, I don't know many places that have that. Now, when we talk about an historic district, we're talking about 25 acres. It's about 25 acres. The Rose Bowl is on 10 acres. Yankee Stadium is on 15 acres. The White House is on 18. And there's 50 down at Buena Vista. I don't know how all that adds up. But I think that the evidence of these books is strong evidence that the legacy of this town has been important for generations. Now, this area is basically a green space. It has been a green space for 100 years. Yes, there's homes up there, but a lot of area around the homes, a lot of shade, and lost the Seven Gables, but the Star of Edgefield's still there, which is the marquee building in that historic district. Been there since the 1860s. Now it's also the site where probably, I can't say for sure, but it's where the negotiations went on for the purchase of this property, for the purchase of the property that built North Augusta, and it can very well be called the birthplace of North Augusta. Now the streets are narrow. Butler Avenue is not curved. It has no lines. It's that way so that it retains an historical feel. Now, Observatory was flat and uncurved until the last paving a year ago. The city came in, when they paved, they put an asphalt curb, which I don't think is done in the rest of the city, but they did put an asphalt curb in. Standing city plans depict a downtown area and a separate satellite area on the ridge at the top of the Georgia Avenue as a historical area. Those are the standing plans, and the ordinances and that we've got that are written and are standing protect that and have protected it for generations. Now, in fact, the truth about ordinances, there's not a more protected location in the city. There's not a more protected location in the city. And in order to overcome those protections, what Mr. Clifford said is right. The city passed an ordinance last year in order to avoid themselves from adhering to those ordinances and those protections, in order to escape what was required. Now, Ronald Reagan has an often spoken statement. He said, "We're never more than one generation from losing our freedoms." Well, we're never more than one generation from losing our heritage either. One generation forgets it, and it's gone forever. This has been protected by this city from the get-go. There have been it's taken some gut punches. There's no doubt about it. But it has been the heart of North Augusta. I'm asking you, when this goes, what's the heart of North Augusta? When this goes, I guess maybe we drop down the hill and say maybe it's a look away or something, but this area, this V that was shaped by James Jackson, that is the heart of this community. What are we going to do when we let it erode more and more? I also have a question about, I'm very confused. What is the plan? Where are we going as a city? We are taking a pillar that something has been an important marker in our community for generations. And we're saying, got a problem with the dirt down here. Property's no different. We'll just go up there. We're saying it's a completely inconsequential move. One piece of dirt is just as good as any other piece of dirt. I'm sorry, but that is evidence of what is urban sprawl mentality, and it's not the way. It's not the way people who are planning construct a city. Now, I respect the presentation that's been made. I appreciate the efforts that they're doing. There have been some improvements, and if we had to, it'd probably be okay. But I'm going to go back to one first. This is a historical area. It shows in the presentation that there's no concept of the historical feel of this community in what's been presented. It doesn't fit with the community at all. Doesn't have a similar feel that contributes to something that's been at the center and the focus of the people of North Augusta for 120 years. And I'll finish with back to this other question. What is the plan? You know, we talk about building up the center of our city, about building up the business downtown. But when this operation goes to the top of the hill, you correct me if I'm wrong, but about the only thing anybody in the city will have to come downtown for is to pay their water bill as far as municipal exercise. Is that the only traffic flow that's left? And we're telling our commercial, our people downtown that we really want them to grow and we want things to get better downtown. And yet all of the activities of government, except for what goes on in this building, which is not very much, except for the water bill, are gone. Libraries out there, post offices out there, the courts are out there. Where is the town? What is the plan? And that's the answer. That's the question I'd like an answer to. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Levin.
Good evening. My name is Mike Hitchler, and I live at 1300 George Avenue. I'm the yellow house right next to the property we're talking about.
I'm sorry, was it Mr. Hitchler?
Yes, Hitchler. And I have my notes from the last time I presented to the Planning Commission right here from, I think it was 3 years ago. And the way I want to start this is start it with exactly what I started that presentation with. My favorite saying from Albert Einstein was, for every physics problem, there's always a simple, elegant solution which is usually wrong. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying that the George Avenue location's wrong. I'm just saying we shouldn't be rushing to judgment. You heard some suggestions today about the tennis courts and other things. I think we should be looking at more than just the two locations to find out what's optimal. But on the other side of it, the last page of this presentation I gave had suggestions if we had to have it there on George Avenue, what were the kind of things we were looking for. And I have to admit that the city has actually incorporated a lot of those things into the design or the suggested layout that's coming forward. My only reservations, I've got 3 reservations with the plan. And one is, as Dave said, the area is a very fragile area in terms of the architecture. The houses there are all Greek Revival and Tudor type designs. And I looked at the pictures of what was being suggested. It had a flat asphalt roof on it, which there isn't a single house in that area, with the exception of, I think there's one place, the TV station that has a flat roof. All the rest of the roofs, the requirement was when they put in the daycare center, that they had to have a peaked roof so it fit into the architectural profile of what you see in the areas. The other aspect is that there should be, to give reverence to the designs in the houses there are ways to, on the facade, to have something like some small Georgia columns or whatever to kind of have it blend in. It's those kind of things that I think are fairly minor in terms of cost that I think would go a long ways if we have to put the police station there. Could actually help it blend in. The second thing is I want to make absolutely certain that, or recommend that the court area be on the north side of the property, more towards the Flythe residence. If we're going to put turn that into the Punch and Judy theater school, we want to minimize the amount of traffic that's going to be, especially if there's a high-speed police car that has to leave. We want to have them going on the other side as opposed to right near where all those children are. So by putting the magistrate office on the north side of the property, where I think that's where it's planned right now, that minimizes the amount of high-speed traffic that could be there, and also it minimizes the amount of noise for the neighbors that live in that area at night. And the other item, last item, was traffic concerns. Observatory is a very busy street. You know, we call it the Observatory 500 at night in terms of the amount of cars that are put there. So we have to make certain that there's ways in which you can handle the extra traffic load. I saw that looked like most of the public safety vehicles were going to be going out on the Butler side towards the corner there, but if there are ways to alleviate that or figure out some way to handle that traffic as well. But the final thing is just the city manager, he's mentioned that he wants to have public input on whichever property we go for. And I look forward to being a participant in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchler.
Stephen Bryant, 129 Butler Avenue. Could you get the cell phone? You look on the first page of that summary that you got it. You've got a table there. It says Neighborhood Preservation Corridor Overlay. That is the only reference to that overlay. You look at the very back, third sheet. It mentions it just in passing, but then there's a whole list for the public use. Okay. The neighborhood, well, actually that's traditional neighborhood, but the overlay is in complete contradiction to a public use. If you go through that, and I urge you to, if you're not real familiar with it, read through that again, and you'll see the limitations that it has. And it's not to protect the property that has the overlay. It is to protect the properties adjacent to it. My concern too is in the zoning ordinance. You have a landmark designation category. And I brought this up 3 years ago. It is still blank. We have landmark buildings that need to have something in place to protect them from future developments. Would anybody here want to see a gas station go up right next to Lookaway Hall or Rosemary? No. But they potentially could. What about the Star of Edgefield? It's not getting the protection that it needs. We need to know what protections should be in a place on a landmark property before we allow it to be developed. Now, I fully expect this property may end up going to public use because the city has done something that no other city or county in the state of South Carolina has done that I could find, and I did extensive research. And that is exempt themselves from their own regulations. I spoke with multiple planning directors, and they all told me, no, we hold ourselves to a higher standard, that we would do more than what is required. And yet the city of North Augusta passed an ordinance to exempt themselves from the most restrictive overlay that protects the existing residents. Now, I am glad to see that they're looking at citizen participation. And there's a section, if you look at your site history, the last sentence there, it says the assessment concludes that both structures are severely deteriorated due to the environment and vandalism and offer no significant history or relevance. I spoke with Mark Noel. He said that is absolutely false. The other thing is that term vandalism that was used by the prior city administrator to put forth that these buildings were worthless. I'm not sure if you all are aware who did that vandalism. It was city employees that destroyed and took wood from the floors, took the windows, took the ironworks, stuff that's going to make that much more difficult to restore. Down on your access, the site currently has direct access to George Avenue and Observatory. There's no reference to Butler. As Mr. Biggers pointed out, that traffic on Butler and George Avenue was a problem, but you missed the real issue is when you're coming out of that driveway for the public safety building and you're looking to go left, the cars that come from Georgia onto Butler, that is a wide angle. They come around that corner with speed and there's not enough distance. Part of the due diligence that I recommend the city do before they even go any further is get a traffic study, a real traffic study, not a paragraph. A 60, 80, 100-page report done by a true traffic engineer, which DOT is going to require you to do. That will more than likely give you indications of what is presented, whether that's going to be valid or not. The other concern I have about the Butler Avenue driveway is I have called public safety probably 20, 30 times in the last year because of people are running the stop sign on Butler Avenue and Martintown Road anywhere from 5 to 20 miles an hour. I have a driveway right around the corner. So as I pull out, it's clear. I look, and then somebody's rounding the corner at 15, 20 miles an hour. My driveway's not that far. I have been told that it's an unfortunate situation that stop sign in the way the roads are skewed. But there's nothing the city can do about it. Well, what happens when you put 200 possible vehicles per day now going down my road? You're taking a major government complex, directing a lot of traffic on the residential streets. And the one on Butler is mostly going to encourage people to go right and then send them down where they run the stop sign, or the traffic will end up backing up as they try to turn left. So your point about the intersection was correct, but it was even more than that. It's dangerous for the people coming out of that public safety building. And as Mr. Clifford said, and I agree with, this project's going to be here for 50 years. You got to get it right. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this spot may not work. That architecture, if you read the neighborhood preservation overlay, talks about compatibility. That building is not compatible. I would suggest the Planning Commission make a recommendation, put forth as a stipulation that has to be done, that they must follow as much of the neighborhood preservation overlay as possible and mitigate any ones that they can't. And one last thing on the current location that's being considered down at Buena Vista. It would take some planning, but think about this. That road that goes there goes to the ballpark, goes to where all the downtown is. If you frame that corner with the current location plus where the current safety facility and courthouse is, frame that with buildings, that's the city's welcoming of framing that for people as they come to visit the city and go to that ball field and go to the downtown. It's going to take some thought and a lot of planning to make that happen so that both facilities could work, but there's your growth for your expansion. And I'd appreciate you listening, and I appreciate the thoughtful questions you guys had at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Are there any other questions or comments from the community before we give Mr. Clifford and Chief Thomas a chance to respond?
So again, I'd like to thank the commission for the opportunity to have this platform to discuss, and I wanted to thank our citizens for being passionate about this issue and bringing their thoughts to the table today. So I'll try to address to the best of my ability Mr. Leverett's, Mr. Hitchler's, and Mr. Bryant's comments. So I'll start with Mr. Leverett's about the other 46 acres. A lot of that acreage counts for things like the dog park. We have a creek running through the middle of that by the greenway, the existing public safety structures. So that would require demolition cost of taking those buildings down. And oh, by the way, we need to have a public safety headquarters in use while we're building the next one. So I can't take those facilities offline in order to do that. And that leaves us really with the community center and the tennis courts as the rest of that acreage that would be protected or the ability to be used. And I guess my counter argument, my concern from the city is, as a city facility potentially goes here, that we're going to have this kind of dialogue with the citizens like we did with Fire Station Number 1 to be able to get design inputs and the like. I can tell you that the current set of developers that I've talked to, as they look at these properties, are looking to use all of it. So some of the historical buildings, legacy buildings there on Observatory Avenue, there's no guarantee of their long-term survival if we sell that to a townhome developer or anybody else. As we look at some of the plans that they would like to present. And I think as we look from a historical perspective, if you want to maintain what you can maintain, the city is probably the best way to do that. So I hope that answers Mr. Leverett's question, although I certainly look forward to future engagements on that. to Mr. Hitchler's point, what I presented really was what we had from JLA, which was the two skins, if you will, the outsides of the building for the current design. I'll say this from a position of ignorance, but to say that, am I opposed to potential outside change to the building? I'm not. I think what we want to make sure is the interior of the building, the guts of the building, really need to kind of stay as is. Can we have a discussion about the roof line? Can we have a discussion about what the exterior of the building is? I think we can. What I don't think we could do is necessarily monkey with the inside of the building. What I presented to the Planning Commission tonight was really the best option I had based on the current design for the Buena Vista site with a different color skin, if you will, on the outside of the building. So certainly as we go through a design process, that is certainly, I think, in the ability to have a discussion about. I'd have to wait and see what the overall cost to those changes would be before being able to make a staff recommendation. But ultimately, I take Mr. Hitchler's point about, hey, you're taking a boxy building and putting it into the historical district, and so ultimately that may not look compliant with the other facilities inside that area. And likewise with the columns. As far as the court area on the north side of the building, as Mr. Hitchler and I had talked earlier, currently there's no plan to orient the facility in any other way, to flip it, if you will, or to move the courts onto the south end of that structure. So ultimately, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think the courts are going to be facing where the historic, the older buildings are on Observatory Avenue. And certainly, as with any other major project, we're going to have to do more traffic study and traffic use, take a look and see what that's going to look like. Our big concern initially is entrance onto that facility from Georgia Avenue, because it is a high-speed avenue, and we didn't want to just dump traffic directly onto Georgia Avenue, nor do we want traffic to come directly out of the facility onto Georgia Avenue outside of the existing DOT kind of approved road network that we have. So again, still looking forward to talking to Mr. Hitchler about some of the design components of that, and to Mr. Bryant, who I know is a architect in his own right. I'm sorry. My apologies, Mr. Bryant, who is a civil engineer. Okay. Well, I was a civil engineer a long time ago, but I don't have Mr. Bryant's credentials. So I'll just tell you that, I don't necessarily agree that the buildings on the Observatory Avenue side are, worthless. I'm not sure if they have the same historic, national historic significance. But the reason that we presented the plan, the initial sketch plan that we have, was to really be able to hold on to those buildings in a long-term kind of way. Now, if the Historic Preservation Societies, Historic North Augusta, and everybody else gets involved in these buildings, I can't guarantee that those buildings are in a condition that they can be salvaged in the way they want to have that. But the city is not approaching this from the perspective of, hey, we're going to knock these down because we need this for our space. There's plenty of time to be used in the future for Historic North Augusta or Punch and Judy players or any other interested party to approach those buildings and to see if something can be done with it. The presence of those buildings on the site does not prevent us from getting after what is, we believe, our core function, which is to have a public safety headquarters and courts building on that site. So again, I would tell you that we're not necessarily calling them worthless. I don't have any plans as the city administrator to knock those buildings down unless there was a life, health, safety requirement to do so, and I'm not aware of any at this point in time. As far as the people slowing down, I would tell you that we see it already on Buena Vista Avenue, and I'm sure you all have as well. Normally when you have a congregation of marked police cars, people tend to slow down in general. So I think that there would be some organic traffic calming associated with having that facility at that location, both for Observatory and for Butler. And I take his points about the California stops at Butler Avenue. That's something that public safety is continuing to try to enforce. But again, I think having a good neighbor in the neighborhood of having your marked police vehicles potentially helps, alleviate some of those problems. And so ultimately, I think those are things that we as the city, and for me as a senior staff member, are certainly willing to have a dialogue about, with our citizens and especially the folks that live in that neighborhood. And again, my fundamental argument, or argument is, if we don't have a city function at that property, what else are your alternatives? A different developer or group is going to come in. I am mandated. What I believe, based on the legal finding I have from our city attorney, is that if we're not going to put a public use facility at this site, that I have to sell the property to the highest bidder to recoup the money that we've put in from our capital project sales tax. And so, at least in my initial dialogue with some of the historic groups, they're not going to be competitive against a commercial developer to get that site based on their current financial status. So ultimately, I think we can get to a way ahead with a lot of our citizen groups and with our concerned citizens. And ultimately, I'd hope that we could come to a consensus and from a design perspective and from an overall quality of life perspective at that site. So I hope that answered our citizen questions and for the commission as well.
Further comments or questions, given the citizens' feedback and response?
Mr. Clifford, I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Did you propose traffic lights coming out of Observatory and Butler on the Martintown side?
That is not part of our current plan, sir. But depending on what traffic studies come back, we'll have to wait and see, what the outcome of that is. But the current information that I have doesn't lead to a traffic light. And from an expectation management perspective, it does take a while to get a traffic light, into play, as we're seeing right now across other elements in the city. It does take a while from flash to bang of, having a requirement for a traffic light to actually get one installed.
So in your mind's eye, at any one time, as being a previous engineer, what would be some of the trips that would be coming outside of the development at any given time? 10 cars, 25, 30? What would be the large number?
I think it depends on the side of the property, sir. So again, the way that this is currently laid out is you have a separation between public safety and the court system. And what we see in the court system is, based on the traffic we have right now on the Buena Vista site, it's a 9 to 5 element, if you will. So you're going to get your peak traffic during the daytime, during working hours. I can't speak intelligently to you today about how many cars are going to come directly out of the court system. And we can certainly take that as an action item. And on the public safety side, you're going to have folks that are going to be moving in and out of that building on a recurring basis through shift. But also for the Planning Commission and for citizens as well, we don't dispatch vehicles directly from the public safety headquarters as a matter of course. What happens is at a shift change, the vehicles go out into patrol in the neighborhoods, and then if there's a problem in town, then they converge on the problem that they're presented with from their patrol sectors. Not that we have a knot of police cars kind of in standby, if you will, from the public safety headquarters to launch that way. But to your point, sir, I don't have a traffic count that I can give you today, and I'll have to take that back as a homework.
I need to speak back again to Mr. Hitchler's comments. They made me feel better because I had the same kind of thoughts that he had on that, the design of the building, because I know the fire station, I felt like that design kind of really was worked upon to make it fit in with the neighborhood a lot better. So I agree with him. When I was reviewing this, I thought, well, okay, I can get the size. I don't think we need to worry about trying to build something you answered my question. They don't want to sell you anything else. You can't make someone sell you something if they don't want to. So you have no other idea there. And public safety needs a place. I mean, we have tried to find them a place. They need to get out of that building, and they need a decent place to work. So I feel like that's really necessary, but I do think that he's correct in his asking us to review the picture that we've been given of that building. Because to me, when I got to that last page, when I was looking at it this week, I was like, that didn't really go. And so if you're open to that, that makes a lot of difference.
Yes, ma'am. I would tell you also, as we did the Fire Station 1 planning, and really my predecessors, not me personally, went through that process, there was a lot of design consideration that came from the local community. And probably the number one, even though it's not necessarily visible to you all, is the fact that they put a underground retention stormwater system on the backside of Fire Station 1, and that was at pretty significant cost. That's about a $300,000-ish add to the fire station. And so that was based strictly on citizen input. The original plan for that was to have an open retention pond in that neighborhood, and obviously we got negative feedback from that, and the citizens wanted to have that changed, and it did. Understand we also don't have an unlimited amount of money, but I think that there are certainly some design changes that could certainly be considered, on the skin of the building, if you will. And so I'm certainly open to those discussions, but I also want to make sure I understand what the overall cost of those changes would be. But I take your point about that the current skin of the building or the design of the building doesn't look alike of the other pitched roofs in the neighborhood.
So we've, I think, heard.
I have one more comment if I could.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Clifford, the question I asked earlier about whether the property could be used for some other building that the city would put up, the reason I made or asked you that was because I've always felt like that this is not the optimal spot for a public safety building, from a number of reasons. It just doesn't fit into the neighborhood to have a police station, and I was hoping it could be something like a North Augusta Little Theater, museum, or some other kind of thing that would be more of a artistic type endeavor. But I understand if it cannot be used for that type thing because of the way the property was purchased, I would not want the city to sell it and use that money for some other purpose. But I do feel strongly that this is not the most optimal use for this property.
Yes, sir.
I second that.
But if there's nowhere else to go, I mean,
Well, when we tackled this 3 years ago, I think we had for the fire department and the fire station, I think we had 4 or 5 different locations that they were considering. This wouldn't work, this wouldn't work, this wouldn't work, that one wouldn't work. So we should be here. And then when we made a compromise for the fire station, I thought that was a pretty good compromise. It was on Martintown Road, and getting out onto the road was a better situation. We had the discussion and ideas put forth that we got these big tankers and it's on top of the hill, and so we went through that, and so I thought we were pretty diplomatic in trying to reach a solution. So we got a stool with 2 legs on it, so we need that third leg. And so that's what I always look at as far as when I'm making a decision. And I try to look at myself, and I try not to consider myself as being dogmatic. I don't want to be a dogmatic person. I understand what the citizens are saying about their homes and the history. I get that. Change is going to happen regardless. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on this earth, hopefully a long time. But change is going to happen around. And some things that the citizens think are bad things turn out not to be. And I tend to want to get a feeling, and the more information I have, the easier the decision. The information I have now is not making my decision any easier. It's kind of like, and this is not to insult you, I'm in sales, and I try not to use sales ploys. So I want a customer to come in. I said I got an appointment at 1 o'clock and 2:30. But I didn't give him any other choice. I gave him 1 o'clock and 2:30. So he's got to pick between 1 o'clock and 2:30. And what about if he want to come in at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock? And so that's pushing him down to where I want him to sit. That's the way I feel. Got 1 o'clock and 2:30. Which one do you want? This one is not going to work. This one's not going to work. This one is a little bit better. And so when I make major purchases, and this is a generalization because I'm one person, if I'm going to spend $40,000 on a car and I'm in love with certain vehicles, I want to know how many vehicles can I buy for $40,000, and I'm going to make that decision. I don't have that cozy feeling at all. And this location, if you tried to come off of Butler or Observatory during peak time, you put your life in danger. And so I don't know how that is going to necessarily be better. And so I'm looking for that third leg of the stool, and I'm still hobbling. I'm still teeter-tottering because I don't have something that is cementing me with the questions that are being asked that I feel cozy. And so it's going to get down to what are some of the other choices, and do I feel good about my decision? So that's my 2 cents.
have you found any other choices? I mean, I've asked that 3 times, I know, but is there anything out there?
Not to my knowledge, ma'am. I would tell you that, as a, being dogmatic myself, I'm a product of my environment coming out of the military, and I like to, when I'm making a decision, I usually like my subordinates to bring me at least 3 options to be able to make a decision on there, and I really wanted to be able to come to the commission with 3 viable options, with a recommended option, but still 3 viable options, not a throwaway course of action. And in the research that we've done to date, I didn't feel particularly comfortable on any of the other options based on cost. I didn't feel that the existing city properties that we owned were viable properties aside from the Buena Vista and from the Georgia Avenue properties. And I'm not sure if the city has the appetite to endeavor on to future land purchases without actually divesting of the current land that we have for this project. So ultimately, that's why I came to y'all with 2 today. We can certainly relook, and you've been clear in your guidance on wanting to look at the community center / tenant court kind of area. We can certainly relook those areas, but at least in my research, I didn't find any other areas that I felt comfortable with presenting.
And I'm not necessarily against it. I thought when I was looking at this was just a rendition. I didn't think this was necessarily seriously that we were going to put on this brick and mortar. And so I'm not necessarily against the location. I just don't. I'm not sold that it's the best location. Ronald Reagan was quoted earlier. He says, "Trust but verify." You should have beat us up with those other options, saying is how these 5 others were not necessarily good, and so therefore we would have started coming over to your side. When you tell us the 2 were the best, then that makes me feel I trust you, but
You want to see the math on the other one, sir?
see the math. You need to pull me over to your side, and you didn't do that.
Well, I appreciate your feedback, sir.
And I'm just being candid. I'm here because I choose to be here, and I want to make a difference, and my heart is in it as well.
So Commissioner Clark.
I just want to make sure I understand what you said earlier. If the city doesn't build the purpose that money was raised for, probably have to sell.
Not probably, sir. I'm definitely going to sell.
The only people who can afford that property are commercial.
Correct, sir.
No historic or anybody else, public service, anything could come close to that price. So being zoned the way it is already, I'm not sure a bunch of townhouses or whatever else, that all the things that could go in there wouldn't be worse. You know this one's gonna be at least kept up. I just saying, you have to realize if you don't do this, something's gonna go there. It's not gonna stay foolish.
So if we could,
So that could be
we-
changed too.
so we need comments only to be made from the microphone, please, just so that it's part of the record
Okay.
as well.
I just wanna make sure.
Yes, sir. You understood correctly in that because the city if the city had purchased this with general funds, the city would have a lot of different options. The city could sell it because that's a city council decision at that point in time, and they can sell it to, a nonprofit or as long as it falls within the codes, they would be okay. But because we purchased this specifically with capital project sales tax money, I went to the city attorney. I asked him for a ruling on, what my options were with this particular piece of property, and the options were you can use it for its intended purpose, or you have to maximize the sale of the property to be able to recoup what you went into capital project sales tax, which are taxpayer dollars.
And can I? Nope.
I just want to make sure everybody else has a chance to
Okay.
share any other,
I'll-
and then we'll come back, but I just want to make sure that everybody else
You
has.
gave me that mama look. I'm scared.
No, I want you to feel heard, but I also want to make sure that everybody else has that same opportunity. So that's all.
Mr. Clifford, I would like to strongly encourage the city to be sensitive to the architectural value of this area as far as the way it looks, and I was not impressed with this rendition either, because it's a very today rendition. I come from a little town next to the coast, and we had a beautiful little square back in the 60s with a nice little courthouse with a copper roof on it. And in the late 60s, the powers that be decided to tear that courthouse down and put a new courthouse. It looked probably great for 1969 or 70, but it totally was out of character with that square. And so instead of having a nice little southern square like most towns in the South do, it now has this monstrosity in the middle of it with all glass and stucco. And so I would encourage y'all to be very sensitive to architectural values when you're ready to do it. And I understand that, and I don't want to see the city sell this property. You know, I want it to be used for city property. I was hoping it could be used for something. In my mind, it was a little more conducive to this property. But if it can't be, and this is the only thing we can do with it, then I would agree with it. But I would encourage you to be very sensitive to the neighborhood.
So I'm going to take a moment just to kind of recap to see if we can if there's anything new that everybody needs to ask, then we'll go from there. So we've heard concerns around did we explore the use of the tennis courts, other uses of properties, and that information perhaps not being shared. I think that there is some disappointment in the actual use and the way that the property has to be handled if it is not used according to the capital project sales tax. I think there are some concerns around architectural and historic considerations for the design for the outside of the building, for the outside. So no one, I think, has concerns about the internal use and it being optimal for our public safety and for all the work that they do, but concerns about making sure the community input and it is in keeping with the architectural style and design of the historic district. And then I think the last that you have heard from, again, both sides being the Planning Commission as well as the community, is traffic study and concerns around that. And as you said, that will be forthcoming, as well as the continued conversation with all parties around said concerns. Is there anything else that needs to be added or that I left out that needs to be considered? Commissioner Key?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
You recapped well.
Okay.
I just wanted to say two real quick things. I do think it's time that we do something positive to help public safety. And I don't think we can just afford to keep that piece of land. I don't think we have the money just to keep that piece of land without a plan of what we're going to do with it and go build something. I can see that we don't have that money available to us. So, I mean, the picture kind of set us all off of, oh gosh, here we go, you know, this isn't going to work. And I wouldn't want that across the street from me at my house. I have other things across from me, but we won't go there. But I just feel like we need to get something done. And when we say there's nothing out there, waiting for somebody to decide to sell something that y'all want could be years. Lots of years before there's something available.
All right. So if there are no other comments, gentlemen? All hearts and minds clear? All right.
Ma'am, again, thank you for the opportunity to present here on behalf of the city, and I appreciate the questions from our commission. Good questions all, and also the feedback from our citizens. And again, I would plan on taking some of the feedback that I have from you all tonight to kind of refine our argument and make sure that we make everyone feel at ease as they can based on the information we have that we can present and potentially move forward at least on one option. And regardless of the location, I agree with a number of the commission members to say that we do need to get public safety headquarters into a new facility sooner rather than later. So I'm committed to that goal regardless of where we do it. And so ultimately, I appreciate your expertise and your guidance in this matter.
Thank you. So can we, I certainly don't mind, I don't want to start going okay, would you, all right. So I will allow one very brief suggestion if you will come to the mic, and then we'll, if you all don't mind, we'll, just one brief suggestion, please, and then.
Probably revealing my stupidity. We talk about the property and our restraints on the way we can use it because of the way we bought it
Okay. There being, nothing else on the agenda this evening, if I could have,
It says that we have to have a written summary of what the sketch plan review within 10 days. You just gonna take everything we said and do that? We don't need to make any kind of motion?
no,
Okay,
no.
good.
no motion needed. Okay. All right, so that there's no motion needed, but I do need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye. All right, thank you all so much, and look forward to working with everyone going forward. Good night.